Hi, and welcome everyone. I'm Virginia Fox from the 5th District of North Carolina, and we're here to talk a little bit about education and issues related to that. As an educator and a grandmother, I am deeply invested in seeing our students offered the highest quality education possible, and that's exactly what Republicans are fighting for. What we have seen exposed over the past 2 years is a bureaucracy first, students last mentality. It's been plaguing our nation's schools for too long. One thing this pandemic gave many parents was a window into what's been going on in traditional public schools, and parents are not happy. They're seeing special interests take priority over the interests of our students, as demonstrated through the months-long school closures. They've also seen activists who want to exploit our classrooms by pushing their own political agenda, and they've seen efforts to diminish the quality of education under the cover of equity. Parents are fed up. So am I. Parents are making their voices heard, though. They're showing up at school board meetings and pushing back against the teachers' unions, keeping their children out of school. This parent revolution is signaling a new era in education. In Congress, we're fighting to break the monopoly of traditional government schools and the totalitarian control of teachers' unions so parents can choose the best learning environment for their child. Educational freedom is powerful. Opportunity to obtain an excellent education should not be limited by zip code. We also introduced the Parents' Bill of Rights to increase transparency and accountability in K-12 schools. And we're holding the Biden administration accountable. Weaponizing the federal law enforcement apparatus to target concerned parents is appalling. It's our duty to make our education system the best that it can be. This means putting the needs of students above the political interest of teachers' unions and above the education bureaucracy's thirst for control. So I'm grateful to hear today from committed advocates of educational freedom and parental rights, and I look forward to this important discussion. I now want to recognize Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from New York.
Thank you, Ranking Member Fox. I am honored to be here today. I represent New York's 21st Congressional District, and I have since 2015. I also serve as the House Republican Conference Chair. I am proud to be a member of the House Education and Workforce Committee. Education has been integral in my life. I'm proud to be the first member of my immediate family to graduate from college, and I know how important it is as a new mom to make sure that we have the best education possible for every child in America. And what we have seen over these past 2 years as we've gone through an unprecedented crisis because of COVID is we've seen kids masked, we've seen schools closed, and parents have been able to look through a window at a very flawed curriculum. Parents are right to be concerned when they see their children being taught radical ideologies, when they see their kids being forced to be masked, and when they see their kids forced to learn at home rather than in person at school. And I want to credit North Country Schools, who have been committed from the beginning of this pandemic to make sure their schools are open. That's because they're listening to their families in their district. Parents have expressed very real concerns about their children's education, and the Biden administration took unconscionable action to silence parents by mobilizing the FBI to intervene at school board meetings. This is truly unprecedented. What we now know is the Secretary of Education, Secretary Cardona, and the Biden administration not only coordinated, they solicited a letter from the National School Board Association, which was then used by Attorney General Merrick Garland to set up a new office within the Department of Justice, specifically targeting parents under the guise of so-called domestic terrorists. This is a war on parents, and it should outrage every family across this country. Parents are not domestic terrorists. Parents are integral to their kids' education, and every teacher that I experienced growing up will tell you a great indicator of a student's success is when their parents engaged in their kids' education. So I'm looking forward to working with Ranking Member Fox and my colleagues on the Parents' Bill of Rights, and I will turn it over to Ranking Member Comer.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik, and as a parent of 3 children in the Kentucky Public Schools, I'm happy to discuss public education and honored to serve on the House Education Committee with Ranking Member Fox. Ensuring all of America's students can return to the classroom must be our nation's top priority. Children are our future, but ongoing virtual school has hurt an entire generation of kids. Children and teenagers are experiencing mental health crisis of historic proportions. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics declared a national state of emergency in children's mental health. Student learning loss due to remote or hybrid learning is astronomical. Suicide attempts, going back to children's health and mental issues, have risen sharply for adolescents, especially ages 12 to 17, rising 51% from early 2019 to early 2021. We need to follow the science and reopen our schools now. But unfortunately, the Biden administration's policies put the union bosses first and America's students last. Some teachers' unions have repeatedly jeopardized American children's education and livelihoods throughout this pandemic. Even worse, the Biden administration allowed radical teachers' union to dictate the CDC school opening guidance, effectively keeping most schools closed. President Biden has repeatedly said he wants schools to remain open, but he has yet to stand up to the union bosses and advocate for America's children. Schools remain one of the safest places for children, and vaccines are widely available for anyone over the age of 5 who wants one. Additionally, $190 billion was allocated to reopen schools safely. Now, in addition to being on the House Education Committee, I serve as ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. We've requested 3 hearings from Democrats pertaining to education. On February 25th, 2021, Oversight Republicans called on Chairwoman Maloney to hold a hearing on child welfare and reopening schools, but she has refused this request for nearly a year. On March 8, 2021, Oversight Committee Republicans called for a bipartisan investigation into the effect school closures are having on children with disabilities and state and local compliance with federal special education requirements. Democrats refused that request. And on May 11, 2021, a subcommittee on the coronavirus crisis and Oversight and Reform Republican lawmakers launched a probe into improper outside influence on the CDC's school reopening guidance by the American Federation of Teachers. The Biden administration has not cooperated with our investigation. House Republicans are going to continue, especially on the Oversight Committee and Education Committee, to try to hold this administration accountable and get our kids back in schools.
Great.
Thank you.
Representative Guthrie.
Thank you very much. I'm a former member of the Education Workforce Committee under your chairmanship, and thank you for conducting this roundtable. But I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Healthcare Subcommittee ranking member. And first I want to say that I'm pleased to be here to talk about what's going on with kids not being in school based on CDC guidelines that we know the union bosses had a hand in. And I will say my hometown of Bowling Green, Kentucky, so we have 2 school systems, Bowling Green and Warren County, and we were in school every day they were allowed to be unless the governor didn't move forward. And our superintendent said, this is summer of 2020, we spent all summer getting ready for this. All of a sudden now they're delaying kids going into school, and we're prepared. And they met almost every day they were allowed, and there was, in 2020, in 2021 school year, there was no evidence of any passage of coronavirus between children because of being at school. And at the same time, in our home state, Jamie, of Louisville, the Louisville school system didn't meet almost all year, I think, until late into 2021. And I know Louisville's bigger than Bowling Green, but we have as urban schools. Bowling Green Independent is urban, is moving forward. And we met every day, and they didn't hardly meet. And the difference was Louisville's represented by a bargaining unit, and the teachers are organized. Our teachers wanted to teach, our principals wanted to lead, and our school superintendents made it available for them to move forward. So it can be done moving forward. So kind of my role is looking at the CDC guidance and making sure we're going to try to, all this confusing guidance coming forward. We have examples of people calling our office or our committee from Washington State, where you have to wear a mask in the classroom. There are teachers who do speech pathology that have to do speech pathology wearing a mask. They have children with hearing disabilities who often read lips, and they have to spell this out while wearing masks. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, that's the thing, the bottom line. We want this to make sense. We want it to work. We want people to be safe. We want people to make sure that we limit the spread. But we also have to do what's reasonable and what's right and helps our young people learn and our children learn. And that's why I'm looking forward to this roundtable. Thank you very much.
Representative Banks.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Chairwoman Stefanik, Leader McCarthy for hosting this today. Look, Democrats and Joe Biden have awakened a sleeping giant. Everywhere I go in Indiana, I hear from moms and dads who are getting involved for the very first time in the political process. Because for almost 2 years, families have put up with school closures, pointless mask mandates, and divisive and political curriculum in their kids' schools, as they've watched the Democrats put their political agenda ahead of the interest of our kids. The Republican Party remains the party of parents, the party that understands that our kids come first. And as a dad of 3 girls who are in public schools, grade schools, these issues hit very close to home for me. My message to the American people today is that in spite of the disastrous year of policies that have come about from the Biden administration and from these Democrats, there is hope. And we saw that hope just this last weekend when the new governor of Virginia, his very first and second acts as governor, when he as a Republican leader took charge, his first acts were to put kids first in our schools. And that's exactly the type of leadership that Republicans are offering and promising when we take back the majority, that we will fight for our kids as well. Parents are winning. I encourage parents everywhere to get involved, show up at their school boards, reach out to superintendents, teachers, and schools, and make your voice heard, because it's making a big difference, and that's the message that we want to echo today.
Representative Sparks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ranking Member Fox, for organizing it. As a mother of 2 girls and also the former educator, I believe the state of our education is a national security issue. And I wanted to share with you some staggering statistics. I served on the State Senate on the Education Committee, and we reviewed some alarming numbers. Only 30% of our children were able to pass elementary reading, writing, and mathematics before the pandemic. Only 10% of children in Indianapolis public schools were able to pass this test. And now I talk to my colleagues, and the recent numbers that we see, we have only 3% of children in Indianapolis school that can pass some fundamental basic skills. This is alarming. This is a huge problem. How we're going to talk about is lifelong learning and attainment and all other different job and workforce development. You cannot build a house on 30% of foundation. You cannot build it on 10, but on 3%, what house is not going to crumble? So the only good thing from this pandemic, I believe, that a lot of parents realize what's happening in schools right now, and they need to be a force to work with us. So it's going to be #1 priority to Republicans to fix education, because it's the future of our children. So I really appreciate your leadership on this issue and my fellow colleagues.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all my colleagues for being here. We have some people who are going to join us remotely. Carol Markowitz, she is a concerned parent and a New York Post and Fox News columnist. So are you with us, Carol?
Yes, I am. Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Should I go ahead? So my name is Carol Markowitz. I'm a columnist at the New York Post, and I also write a column for Fox News and some other places. And in the last 2 years, my beat has very much become education. I used to write about all kinds of things, and then in the last 2 years, where everything was stripped from
find complete agreement with you on what we want people to see us as in terms of the party of education and school choice. Now we have Allie Barnaccia, who's a Taft Union School student with us.
Like from slacking off on my grades, and what kept me doing good in school was motivation. And I would say that the primary source of my motivation came from my parents, because they taught me like why it was important to work hard and the rewards you can get from it. But during this time also, I have friends whose parents are working, both are working full time. I have a dear friend that's
Recording in progress.
I have a friend that is one of 5, and along with getting her schoolwork done and making sure that she has all of her supplies she needs, getting the education she needs, she's also making sure her siblings who are in elementary school, junior high, are getting on their Zoom, fulfilling their needs. If they have questions navigating technology, she was the one to help them, along with trying to learn her own information and do the best she could in school. Going back to school has been kind of a struggle, because I did notice a difference in my social behavior. I became more withdrawn from everything. I was very outgoing and loved to do sports, and I saw myself withdrawing from sports, not hanging out with friends, kind of a lack of motivation, because going back to school kind of like hit me hard. And now that I'm back also with being in ASB, we put on rallies and lunchtime games. I could tell the whole school was feeling the way I am. They were definitely, there was a very spirit when trying to get everybody together and participate in fun games. There wasn't as much enthusiasm. Everybody was kind of like, oh, like, I don't really want to do this. I'd rather just go home. And that was in the beginning of the year. Now I can probably vouch for a majority of all my students that I go to school with. We have seen positive effects of social. We're getting more people engaged. More people are having fun. There is less anxiety, I feel, as students, because they're now getting the schooling that they need, and so they're feeling back into a new normal of getting their life back to how it was before COVID. So I think that school is definitely, going back, has improved my social behaviors as whenever we were online.
Thank you very much, Allie. We are sorry about the loss of involvement in school that you've had, but you really do seem to be motivated, so we're sure you're going to overcome all this. We have Beth Feely, who's a Chicago area parent and co-founder of New Trier Neighbors. Are you with us, Beth? what problems students would have with online, with the learning, the virtual learning, that these kinds of things happened over and over again. We all experience them. Beth, you look like you're back.
To this entire. Oh, hello? I
Hear you.
Can you hear me? I apologize for this. One of the problems is that my kids are actually, one of my kids is home from college for 2 weeks because they're not back in school because of COVID. And so we're putting a little stress on our Wi-Fi. I apologize. I'm unable to tell if you can hear me. Okay, I'm going to try exiting and re-enter.
You want to go to Ashley? Okay, Beth, we'll try to come back to you, but let's go to Ashley Smith, who's Baltimore County Public Schools parent.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello? It appears the same thing's happening to me that was happening to Beth. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. Okay, my name is Ashley Smith. I'm from Catonsville, Maryland. I'm a mother of 2 elementary age boys who attend Baltimore County Public Schools. I can provide a unique perspective from the point of view of a special needs parent who endured virtual learning in one of the last school districts to open in the entire country. My 9-year-old son is a non-speaking child with autism and severe developmental disabilities, and has a profound effect on his day-to-day life and education. Children like my son are largely left out of the equation. I'm here today to stand up for them and all children who are forced to endure the disastrous experiment known as virtual learning. I want to thank Congressman McCarthy for hosting this roundtable and allowing me to speak to you and the other representatives today. We need to also focus on the children that were entering school at the time that the lockdown occurred, who needed the social development that school provided. My kindergarten age son, when he entered kindergarten, he was forced to do virtual learning pretty much the entire year. And it isolated him to the point where he barely was speaking, and he never actually learned to read. Even to this day, he's now in 1st grade. He's very far behind, and I credit that not to the teachers. They did their best given the circumstances they were in. But unfortunately, there's a lot of children in this school district that are very far behind. And there needs to be a plan to bring them back up to academic standards. And so far, it seems like they're just pushing ahead with the curriculum and not taking a step back to help these children who are not on grade level. And also, I wanted to touch on the fact that during virtual learning, a lot of the special needs students, like I said, the teachers and the therapists, they tried their best given the circumstances they were in to provide the best care possible. But unfortunately, virtual therapy is not ideal. And my son severely regressed behaviorally. He was not able to perform tasks the way he did when he was in the school environment. Children with his needs, it appears the meeting's delayed. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
speaking, it's like the screen keeps on. I wanted to make sure that I was still being heard. Thank you so much. My son and others like him, they really need routine and structure, to thrive and to gain the skills they need, to do their day-to-day life tasks, and just to do simple things that the rest of us take for granted. And it was just very frustrating during virtual learning, seeing him regress and, not being able to go to school, which he absolutely loved school. It was one of the few things that made him happy. A few times I ever would see him really be happy is getting on the school bus. He really, really craved that structured environment that the school provided. And he also, just really loved the interaction with his teachers there. So it was very detrimental to him. And my now first grader never got that experience at all. He didn't know what in-person school was. He unfortunately, never got the social interaction that the school would have provided to give him, the skills to make friends and to socialize. And it was very detrimental for his mental health. Prior to virtual learning, he was a very kind, sweet boy. We never had any issues. Me and him had a great relationship, and all of a sudden virtual learning comes along and I'm the bad guy. I have to put him on the computer for 6 hours a day, and he's just begging me, "Mama, no, don't make me do it. I don't want to get on the computer." And it completely broke my heart, seeing him so distressed and not understanding, why can't I go to school like my big brother did? My big brother used to get on the bus. I used to see him every day, and now, why don't I get to do that? And like I said, it was just absolutely heartbreaking as a parent. And we need to make sure that this never happens again. We need to keep the kids in school. And I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The stories we've heard from the parents and from Allie are certainly very familiar to all of us from our constituents. And we've heard these stories over and over again, that these are problems. Chairwoman Stefanik, you mentioned that fortunately in your area, the schools did stay open a lot. But what are you hearing from parents in your district, and what changes need to be made now?
That's a great question. So I know Carol participated today, and she left New York City. New York City had much more stringent COVID policies, both shutting down small businesses but forcing remote learning. In upstate New York, and I'm as far upstate as you can go in the North Country, I really credit the superintendents. What they did was they asked the parents for feedback, what was most important to them. And I had a superintendent roundtable, and it was interesting. Over 90% of the parents said it was a top priority to make sure their kids were learning in schools. So that's what superintendents and frankly teachers and principals should be doing all across the nation, and that's not what we saw in New York City, but I really credit the superintendents and leaders locally in my district for making that commitment to in-person learning. So that's what I'm hearing from parents. I'm hearing from students when I see students or run into their families at the grocery store or around the district. The kids will tell me, if they have friends who have had remote learning, how absolutely challenging it is, particularly for those underserved kids who potentially have challenges at home, who potentially don't have access to broadband. That's another issue in rural America and rural New York. When you force remote learning, many people don't have access to broadband, and it's just been devastating. So thank you to the guests for sharing their story.
Yes. Beth, I don't know if you have a better connection now, if there's anything else that you wanted to share with us today. I know you got cut off, and I want to give you another chance if you have the opportunity. No. Okay, doesn't look like it. So we'll keep our ears open and eyes open to see whether you get back on the screen or not. I know, again, the examples that we've heard today are that we're basically social people, and we like to be together in learning in particular. And so these students have been very disadvantaged by this method that the public schools, the government schools, I call them, have come up with. But it's so refreshing to see parents taking control. And I agree with Carol. I think the best thing that has come out of COVID has been the exposure of the inadequacies of the government schools. And I think hopefully in the future, parents will stay involved, and they're going to take better charge of what's happening in the schools and making sure that their children are getting the high-quality education that they deserve and that the taxpayers are paying for. For heaven's sakes, the cost of running the schools hasn't gone down. In fact, it went way up during COVID because we appropriated so much money. But I don't know who else might want to make a comment about that, but I think that we definitely have got to see that schools are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Representative Comer.
No, I absolutely agree. And where I reside in Monroe County, Kentucky, Southern Kentucky, our schools did great. They were open for the most part. My children, however, go to school in Franklin County, which is the state capital. Very active teachers union there. They were like Jefferson County. They stayed shut down for the majority of COVID. And big difference in test scores from those two counties, which usually had similar test scores. It's very apparent that virtual learning was not working. A lot of teachers there in the Franklin County school system said, well, we needed money. We needed money to be able to reopen safely, even though most schools in Kentucky were already open safely. We appropriated, as Chairwoman Fox mentioned, $190 billion. But this is where we need to have oversight, and this is where is this $190 billion gone? No teacher can answer that I've spoken with throughout my congressional district. So this is a thing that we'll do when we take over the House. I know the Education Committee, Oversight Committee, Chairwoman Fox serves on both. We will hold these schools accountable that got this money. We want children and teachers to be able to operate in a safe environment. But the data and the science shows that being in school is a safe place to be. So hopefully when we take over the House, we can hold hearings, we can let the American public see what Congress is going to do about trying to get our kids the best possible public education.
I wanted to share something my daughter said when they had Zoom lessons. She said, Mom, it's such a waste of time. By the time everyone logged in, we're ready to log out. So children even realize that it's really not bringing value, and I think that's something will really, and especially children that really need that, one-on-one interaction and really, need that time to be in schools. They need it the most. A lot of these kids didn't have that exposure to in-person learnings, and it's going to be a huge problem going forward.
And we know from test scores, from studies that have been done, mental health problems are up, test scores are down, as you pointed out, Representative Spartz. So even with all the money that was allocated, very little of it's been spent because it's clear that the schools were not equipped to do this, and they should have been. And yet, when you look around and see what happened with private schools, parochial schools, for the most part, many of them were able to adapt and keep the children in school.
But Madam Chair, we had that in Kentucky, as we're saying, and I think Chairwoman Stefanik just said is clear. If a superintendent wanted a school system to work, it worked. I can tell you parallel schools, say you don't want to compare Bowling Green to Louisville, I'll make the comparison, but people won't. There are similar situated school systems in Kentucky that chose not to open, where our superintendent says, we're going to make this work. And our teachers wanted to, Greene County, right next to Monroe, as rural as, they were open every day they could be open. It was a desire for the superintendents, the principals, and the teachers to make it work. And they did it in an outstanding way where they chose to do it.
Yep, yep. Representative Banks, again, we know you have children in school. Tell us what has been the reactions you've had and what you've heard from your parents. It's interesting, we've got two people from Indiana and two people from Kentucky, here today. So that's very interesting. We've sort of cornered the market here.
All right. Got all you need.
Well, in Indiana, we have one of the largest school choice programs in the country. So we provide that effectively in our state to give parents choices. And that's come in very handy over the last couple of years. Many parents have decided to make a different choice than the options that they had before. But Dr. Fox, I still hear from a lot of parents who are upset that their kids, well, they might not have to wear a mask in class, they have to wear a mask on the school bus, and a lot of the other disruptions that continue to occur, even in school districts like in Northeast Indiana and throughout my state, which have struggled to remain open. There's still a number of policies that have been put in place that don't make sense. I mean, our the science is very clear. Our kids are at the lowest risk of any age group or segment of the population of contracting COVID or spreading COVID, and our kids are still punished for these decisions by school administrators, school board members who aren't listening to parents. But that's the encouraging part of it. Again, the parents are showing up in ways that they never showed up before and speaking out, and I continue to encourage that everywhere that I go.
You know, I was on a school board for 12 years some time back, but I always encourage the public to show up at the school board meetings, because you learn a lot by being there and hearing the things that are going on. And also, but there are many school boards that don't want that to have happen. They don't want it. And, you know, the schools often give lip service to having parental involvement, but we've known for probably 75 years that the best schools in our country are the ones with excellent principals and parental involvement. Learning increases in those schools, and yet in many school systems they don't want the parents involved because they ask too many questions, and it's inconvenient for them to have the parents involved. But parents are the first teachers of their children. They're the ones that know the children best, and it's really important that we have them involved.
Before we go to questions from the press, Beth might be able to join us one more time.
Okay.
Let her know she can come on.
Beth, you can come on.
Beth, go ahead and come on.
Hopefully third time's the charm here. So thanks, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm hearing so many things that I just echo, and I'm really grateful for you to put together this conversation and to have us giving some input. So my name's Beth Feely. I live in the north suburbs of Chicago. I am really a mama bear. About 5 years ago, I noticed some trends that were concerning to me in my kids' schools along the lines of being politicized with woke agenda. And so I co-founded this citizens group called New Cheer Neighbors, and that is a way to address these issues. And as has been stated already, a lot of the issues that we had noticed became to the fore over the last 2 years with COVID, because when schools shut down, parents saw what their kids were learning. And I agree, it's really was the silver lining to this experience. As far as virtual learning, I think it was really dystopian for our family. My kids were doing class on their iPads in their bedrooms. They lacked face-to-face interaction with teachers and students. And it was all, for a virus that really largely was not affecting their age group, and nor was it spreading in schools. One of my kids won't study in their room anymore because it brings back such bad memories from that year. And my other kid, normally a really social, upbeat child, he just over the year became increasingly despondent and demotivated. In between classes, he'd go sit on the couch, and he really needed to be in school, walking the halls and talking with friends, because I think there's a lot of informal interaction that our kids missed out on in addition to that, the academics. So, we were along for the first couple months of slowing the spread, but, we're here in Illinois entering 2 years of, we now have this mass testing. We've got forced masking of kids, despite, evidence that it's effective. There's a pressure to vaccinate young kids, and, it's a virus that really now seems to be a minor cold for them. And then there's this constant threat of school closures or hybrid learning or something when there's a spike in cases. And at my son's high school, at New Trier High School, they just canceled finals because of Omicron. So there's no way to get your grade up at the end of the year. I suppose you can work it out with the teacher, but I don't think we're teaching our kids resilience when we act like that. So, overall, I think we've, this has blunted our kids' academic progress. It's conditioned them to submit to these mitigations. And it's really, I think, taught kids to be fearful and hopeless. And, in Cook County, where I live, we have had more deaths of suicide among youth than we have had COVID. And just 10 miles to my south is Chicago. And the students in the city of Chicago have suffered even worse in the Chicago public schools. It is a system where pre-COVID, only 14% of Black students were reading at grade level in 11th grade. And yet 73% of them ended up graduating. That is a really concerning statistic. And, just earlier this month, they lost yet another week of school because of a 4-day teacher union-led walkout, and it kept more than 300,000 kids out of class. So, I think we can't shut down and lower our standards every time things get tough. I think we need to focus on resiliency, and I think we need to end the panic and allow people to make the decisions that are responsible for them when it comes to living their lives, and that includes as it relates to schools. I also have a lot of experience with equity. That's actually what initially how I got into kind of this activist role. And so share your concerns about some of these influences that are overtaking education. I don't think they're healthy. They're definitely not balanced. And I think that they end up with lower quality education for all.
Well, thank you very much, Beth. I'm glad we got the technical difficulties solved. We have some members of the press here with us. We have Henry Rogers with the Daily Caller, Ashley Oliver, who's with Breitbart. She's an education reporter. My understanding is these folks know their business. And Alex Nestor here with us. Do you all have questions you'd like to ask us or ask some of the folks who are on the program with us?
Well, thank you guys for doing this. I think it's extremely important, and it's better than nothing, obviously, since you all are not in the majority right now, that you are doing something, and having roundtables, it's something. I don't think this issue should be political at all, but it is, unfortunately. I grew up in Northern Virginia, which is extremely liberal. They've had a disastrous time during COVID. I've done a lot of traveling this year, and I've been down in Arkansas and North Carolina, South Carolina, and they've been handling things, a lot differently. I guess my question for you all is, how do you all plan on passing anything, or have you had talks with any of your Democrat colleagues about this issue? Because it shouldn't be political. I mean, it's just the science doesn't make sense for it to be political. Kids should be in school. We just heard from a number of people who have kids who have suffered terribly from this. So, I mean, do you think that there's anyone on that side of the aisle who would be willing to sit down and work with you on this?
Well, I have not had a chance to speak to any of our Democrat colleagues on this issue. However, you're exactly right. This should not be a political issue. The education of children should be something we all care about. The Parents' Bill of Rights, is composed of principles that absolutely every person we believe in the United States should believe in. But unfortunately, everything around here does get made political, and nothing more so than education sometimes. But we agree with you. Shouldn't be political. The parents should have the right for all of these things we've listed in the Parents' Bill of Rights, and we welcome the Democrats to join us in passing that. But I'll allow my colleagues to make comments.
I would say I agree with what Ranking Member Fox said, but I do think it's interesting to look at the state of Virginia. It wasn't just Republican voters that elected Glenn Youngkin. It was Republican, Democrats, and independents. And I would make a divide between elected Democrats in office versus Democratic voters across the country. This is an issue that we win on. I hear from people of all political affiliations in my district who want their kids back in school.
And totally, and to that point, and that's what I was going to be my follow-up is I mean, do you have to wait until this next election for anything to get done? Because I mean, we have a long time before then essentially, and kids are suffering every single day. So are we gonna have to wait until 22? Because I think that will be the issue that gets Republicans back in the House majority. But do you think you'll have to wait till then?
Well, let me point out to you, these parents are showing us, no, we don't have to wait. At the local level, there's nothing to stop people from making demands. Chairman Banks.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. It shouldn't be political, but it is political. You recognize that the nation's largest teachers union, the American Federation of Teachers, has increased its political spending 400% since 2008, from $3.7 million to nearly $20 million in 2020. And 99% of those dollars went to support Democrat candidates for office. You realize how political this has become. And fueled by the left, the teachers union pushing a left-wing agenda, whether it's teaching anti-Americanism and far-left ideologies in our schools or advancing the Democrats' COVID agenda. They've hijacked our schools, they've hijacked our kids' education for their political cause. But to the point of this conversation today, the American people see it. They see it for what it is, and people who were never political before are becoming political. They're getting involved, they're speaking out. And while I wish we didn't have to wait until the next election, it's clear that this is part of the Democrats' design, and it's going to take winning back the House majority to do something about it.
Alex, it looks like you have a microphone in your hand, and you might want to ask a question.
I do, and that actually led in very well to my question, and that is what can be done about teachers' unions? I mean, elections are very important, clearly, but you have teachers' unions who for the past 2 years have been making such lengthy, lists of demands, from being front in line to receiving the vaccine, spending millions on PPE and whatnot in the classrooms, the radical progressive ideology in the classroom. What can be done to stop teachers' unions who are not elected?
Representative Sparks, did you want to speak to this or to the last question?
I can speak to both. I think, this is an issue that's important for all of us, Republicans and Democrats. And, I spoke to some of my Democrat colleagues, and some of them agree with me on a personal level that we have to deal with this issue. We have issues in their district that affect their children as much as children in my district. But unfortunately, under current Democrat leadership and Speaker Pelosi, that's not going to be an issue because it's all politicized. Education, healthcare, probably two most politicized issues I've ever experienced in my life. And I think this issue should be dealt at the state level at this point. I think we could be also a mechanism to collaborate with the states and local governments, but it's not going to happen under the current leadership. And it's not going to happen, on the leadership also of the union. There are a lot of good teachers that we need to engage with that could be our allies as much as the parents because they want to do some things, they dedicate lives, and we shouldn't be anti-teachers. But leadership in a lot of these unions, and if there are some good people in leadership who want to work with it, let's work with them. Let's, talk about this is an issue that it is going to, destroy our country. I mean, literally, if we don't deal with that. 30% of our children are eligible to go in the military. This is another staggering statistic. This is, if we want to continue to be world power with opportunities from every child to pursue happiness, we have to fix these fundamentals and go back to fundamentals and find a life from all of the sides. But it's not going to happen, I hate to say, under the current leadership in the House. And as a Republicans, if we win, I think we win, we should take leadership on this issue.
Representative Comer.
Well, if the question is will there be any oversight over public education or the teachers union while the Democrats are in control? I can answer that, no. They have shown no sign of providing oversight. We've appropriated money. There's a lot of questions as to where that money was spent, if it's even been spent. There were very few guardrails with where the money was supposed to go to help make classrooms safer. So these are the type of things that Congress should be doing now that should be bipartisan. That shouldn't be a partisan issue, how you spend tax dollars. So I think that the American people are standing up to the outrage. And not all unions are bad. I don't want that to be the message from this. But in the cities where there's been, just shutdown of the school system, that is a direct correlation with a very active teachers union. and there's no comparison between the education a child receives in class versus virtually. And we've seen with this committee hearing the technology challenges in rural America. My district's overwhelmingly rural. These kids weren't even able to download their homework assignments because they didn't have internet. They didn't have high-speed internet. And they were saying, well, go to a McDonald's. Well, a lot of these counties don't have McDonald's. The Farm Bureau offices stepped up, and it was just it was a disaster. So I think the American people, as Chairwoman Fox has said, they're standing up. They're letting their voices be heard. And I think the Democrats in Congress will eventually get that message. Now, will they get it before the November election? I don't know. But that's going to be a big issue in this election, this midterm.
Ashley, now I think you have the mic.
Yes,
So you have a
thank you.
question you'd like to ask?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Thank you for having this. So I just wanted to get your take, taking Virginia for instance, you've got a couple blue counties like Arlington and Richmond that are saying that they're going to defy Governor Youngkin and continue with the mandates, specifically the mask mandates. There's probably some other things in there that they're going to do as well. But you have Arlington saying that the health supports them continuing to have these mandates in place. You had White House Press Secretary Jeff Psaki come out and praise Arlington County Public Schools for standing up against the governor. If you could kind of face them directly and give them a counterpoint and kind of respond to what they're arguing and what they're saying about how they're going to defy the governor, what would your message to them be? Because there might be similar occurrences happening in your states, across the country.
Representative Guthrie, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think you just look at the science with it, and it seems like people are mandating masks and to be wearing a mask. I will tell you, in my community, I went to a school the other day to give an appointment to a kid who's going to go to a young man is going to go to West Point, and it was some teachers had masks on, a lot of the students didn't, and like I said, they're not having spread. And when I was saying that my school systems were open, this was August of 2020. Before there were vaccines, before there were a lot of the therapeutics that we have, and a lot of what we know now, and the money that we've spent. Because now we spend all this money and schools still aren't open. I mean, I don't understand Virginia law, but I think if it's a state law or that the governor has the authority to do that, I don't know how they can defy them. But that's hopefully something they can rectify in Virginia. But and as Representative Comer and I were talking, if you go to areas of Kentucky that where the teachers had a bargaining unit or a union, where the union, we have a Kentucky Education Association that represents a lot of teachers, but really bargain for their in a union contract. Those are the ones that were shut down, and the ones where the superintendents wanted to make it work, and the teachers wanted to teach, so they wanted young people to teach. And get back to the answer on energy and commerce. I've talked to several members on the other side of the aisle about Center for Disease Control and how the information coming from them is so convoluted and it changes all the time, and you can't make, that's a big problem of it. Where is science? Because it seems to change every other day from them, and we're trying to, would love to have hearings on that, but I'm not sure the higher leadership of the Democratic Party is going to be able to allow that to happen until we take control, hopefully in 2023. I guess it'll be 2023 when we actually take the gavels and call them on the carpet to answer for some of these decisions, because it's not just infectious in cases, as you said, it's almost like a cold to younger people. It's all the other things, not being able to get your speech pathology, and that's all health related. And so we want to look at the whole problems that have come from this. And it all seems to be, in blue counties and blue areas, it's all about, are you wearing masks, or you're not wearing masks, are you showing your vaccine card, or are you not? At the same time, we're losing a year or two, a generation of students.
Carol, I understand you wanted to speak up. Please go ahead. We're connecting you now.
Is that me? I didn't raise my hand or anything, but I like what you're all saying. I would say that my only kind of thought / concern is that in a lot of cases, obviously Republicans, conservatives, revert to we should have a more localized control, like superintendents, etc. But I would say that the most localized control is the family, and the family should decide for themselves whether or not to have masking of their children. And so I get the impulse to bring it to the most local level possible. But I really do think the individual is the most local we can get in this case. And, you know, you have situations like in New York, for example, where Governor Hochul imposed mask mandates on the whole state, and there's no exceptions, and the individual superintendents can't make their own rules. And I think instead of pushing for the local school districts to decide, it really should be the parents.
Well, we know, again, that there are wide variations in how the states are handling this, how the governors are handling it. And in many ways, we have to step back right now and say we have to honor that, because Republicans have always believed in local control for education. The word education is not in the Constitution. However, we want to inject where we can. Over the years, Democrats have put in tremendous numbers of rules and regulations for the money that is being given out from taxpayers at the federal level. So we want to have a better balance of what's happening. But as we've heard from people all day today, this whole session, is parents will vote with their feet. They will leave. We know lots of people who've left New York City and gone to southern states where they have the freedom to do the things that they want to do. And I think we'll continue to see that. And it's going to take the people to make changes to force them. And as Representative Comer said, eventually we believe and we hope that Democrats will come to grips with this movement. How long it will take is another issue. So I think we've hit our time frame, and so I'm going to thank everybody who was on Zoom. We appreciate you coming on. We appreciate the members of the press being here, and all of my colleagues for making such excellent comments on this issue. It is not going away. We don't want parents to go away. We want them to stay involved. We want an education system in this country that is worthy of the people of the country, and that is one that it's not a national system, but in every locality it should be very, very high quality. Our students deserve it. So thank you very much for joining us.